Good evening guys, I'm Chris and welcome back to a quick Q&A at Rift Amps. Right, I've actually popped into the workshop today it's actually now Santa's workshop, so I am wrapping all the presents and stuff because I've got far more space here than I do at home for stuff like that, and of course the missus can't see or any of the presents that I'm wrapping for her. So yeah, I've come down to do that, but yesterday's video on the two EL84 amps, the Vox AC10 and the 18-watt clone, got loads of comments, loads of questions. So I figured while I'm here, we'd do a Q&A because I didn't actually plan to do one this week. So let's crack on. Okay, we got a question from Jake who said about the 18-watt clone. I believe the EL84 max plate dissipation is 12 watt and then the plate plus the screen is 14 watt. The amp is still biased too hot, but it's not running at 122%. Lyle at Psionic says the plate voltage should be no more than 340 volts DC, if he remembers correctly, though that's higher than the max rating of 300 volts on the data sheets that he has seen. Not quite. There's a bit more to it than that. First of all, yes, the data sheets say the max plate or anode dissipation is 12 watts and the max screen dissipation is 2 watts, correct. But the modern data sheets don't really give the full picture anymore like they used to. And on the much older data sheets, you would also have a figure that said, well, if you're running at the maximum, therefore on your anodes, then your screens can't also be running at the maximum. Most valve or tube failures happen where it's not the plate or the anode that has over dissipated, it's actually the screen, and so that's the thing that you really need to make sure is under control. And so older data sheets might say your maximum combined anode plus screen might be, in this case it wouldn't be 14 watts, it might be 13.5, for example. Goes even further than that, because what you've forgotten, Jake, or what you might not know, let's be fair, is that this amp also has triode operation where the screen is connected electrically to the anode, and therefore the 12 watt plus 2 watt figure should be ignored. Never run at that if the amp has got triode operation, unless you really quickly want to burn up your screen grids. The old rule of thumb was if you have triode operation, you need to be 5 to 7% lower than your maximum combined. So let's say we're taking 14 watts as our maximum combined. 5 to 7% lower is 13 to 13.5 watts combined. Assuming that your screen resistors are adequate. Okay, you've got enough resistance there to help limit current as these things overdrive. But by what I've done there is by lowering it down to 12 watts, lowering that combined figure down to 12 watts, which is what I always prefer to do. I always just say, well, ignore the screen dissipation and pretend the max anode dissipation is the max combined. It just gives everything more thermal headroom, all right? And there's no need to push things any further than necessary. And a lot of amp techs would agree with that. And I've said in the past, it was very popular for amp designers at the time to push EL84 amps valves much further than they ever needed to be. So, and what we found, and of course back then, valves were cheap. You know, if a set of valves lasted you a year, you know what? It wasn't a lot to buy a matched set of valves and just stick them in, and you know the cathode biased amps, so you just plug them in and play and off you go. And if they lasted another year, great, no problem. Now valves are pretty much 2.5 times the price that they were back then. Yeah, bring it all down, cool it down, run them safely, stop pushing things as hard as you used to. Whereas before, you know, 100% was the target. Now that's the absolute maximum if everything else is okay. So we tend to just be a bit more conservative with it. There's very little loss in tone, if at all. I've proven that before on the oscilloscope and on the spectrum analyzer. So yes, that covers that, okay? In terms of your comment about the plate voltage should be no more than 340 volts DC, that's anode to cathode voltage. Yeah, I would agree with that. I generally don't like to go above 350 unless there's a very specific reason for that. The higher your anode voltage you go with it, the more you push it. You need to lower your screen voltage by a more appropriate amount, so you get a wider gulf between the two. I know of one particular amplifier on the market that runs 450, 460 volts on the anodes, but the screen voltage is only about 250. Okay, and that's two EL84s in class. Well, I guess it's AB2 when it's running clean. I mean, probably closer to class B than class AB2, to be honest. But yeah, that's. But it is possible. You can do it. You can push these things harder. Obviously, you need to make sure that your RA to A is appropriate as well. So yeah, if you study the data sheets, and don't just study one, study them all, learn what's been going on, and when you go through other people's amps, find out what they're doing, and say, well, and if something doesn't look right, don't just assume it's wrong. Understand why. Do your sums, draw your load lines, work all this stuff out. And quite often you'll find some really interesting and clever ways of running valves that to the layman or to someone who's not quite clued up on it yet would just think is wrong. Alva Goldbook says, ran some quick maths and a 30.95 microfarad reservoir cap should be enough to get the voltage ripple down to 10% or 36.5 volts. My money is on the cap being faulty. Yes, mine too. So the standard value for there is 32 microfarad, and often that is enough. However, filtering further downstream, especially for the screen node, the standard value is 32. Often upping that to 50 really helps as well. So there's some things we can do, things we can mess around with, we'll see. But yeah, really good comment. Thanks for the maths. James Underhill, regular commenter of the channel, says, Merry Christmas to you and yours as well, Chris. Well, you're more than welcome. Looking forward to the repair on both of these amps, especially the Vox, as it's the same age as me. Regarding filtering, can you put too much into a circuit? And can you further explain ghost notes, please? Thanks, Jim. Filtering, can you put too much in? To a point, yes. The reservoir cap, there's often a limit if you're using a valve rectifier, so you need to look at the data sheet for that. And also it depends if it's an RC input or a choke input, so there's things to consider. But for caps downstream, you can, within reason, you can pretty much choose as much as you like. But then when you get into territories of not just electrical performance, but how these things play and perform, and whether, you know, a lot of guitar players like to use words like sag and bloom and touch response and stuff like that. And if you stiffen up a power supply too much, you can compromise those things. Now, depending on the style of amplifier, you might want to do that. You might want a really stiff, strong power supply with very little play in it, or very little give, I think is a good way to describe it. For example, super high gain metal amps, you know, you don't want a saggy bottom end on those, do you? So that sort of thing. And can I further explain ghost notes? Yes, ghost notes easy. You would have all heard them to some extent or the other. There's lots of different types, but the main one and the most common is where you have a faint, out of tune note that appears underneath the note that you're playing, and it gets really annoying. It's not normally a lower frequency note. In fact, yeah. But it's, you're playing lead lines, for example, and I don't know, you bend a note up, for example, you'll hear the note, you'll hear the harmonics on top, and there'll be a weird out of tune low note below it that just came out of nowhere. That's what we mean by ghost notes and ghosting. And because it's coming through the speaker and it's audible, you know, it's probably the same volume level as the notes you're playing, you can't record with that because it's just there's an out of tune note everywhere. Rubbish. So yeah, that's kind of ghosting. There are other types too, and maybe one day we'll get into that. But yeah, great question. Dawn and Grant says, another fascinating one. Look forward to the resolution of the Marshall clone. Yes, that will be in the new year. Inspired me to go and find a simple guide on how a guitar amp works, just so I can follow it all better. You're more than welcome. As most of you know now, unlike all the other amp techs on YouTube, I do my videos differently. Mainly because everyone else does everything the same. And because I'm primarily a manufacturer and builder of amplifiers, and the repair stuff just comes with the territory, I decided to do my YouTube content and my channel differently to everyone else. So I do the workshop diary stuff, and I aim it more at the casual viewer. So I always say this is not a tech channel. There are other tech channels out there who arguably create content in that format much better than I ever do. And I love that. So if you want that, go watch them. Please do. Love it. But if you want something that's a bit more relaxed, a bit more easy to follow, a bit more jargon free, please watch my stuff. I'd love to have you along. I thoroughly enjoy reading all your comments and questions. So if you are getting something out of this and it's not too techy, it's not too confusing, I always say that if the most complex this ever gets is some signal tracing on an oscilloscope and a quick bit of maths for calculating bias and stuff like that, that's kind of the limit. Anything more than that, casual viewers will switch off. So hopefully you found a place where you can come and learn something without it being too much. But I'm certainly not going to change what I'm doing. The workshop diary format works for me. It's easy for me to make. It doesn't take too much time away from the work I'm actually being paid to do. I've explained this all before. You get it. But yeah, I do enjoy doing it. Just a quick one on the Matamp mini amp. The old neon bulb is no longer available from Matamp. They don't make them anymore. Well, they don't stock them anymore. Reason being is that I think Hayden said they become very expensive and they have to have a certain minimum amount. Now, it's designed to run on an AC circuit. I've got it here, stripping it down, but they run it off the B+. And it's actually a fluoro bulb. There she is, and it actually glows green itself. And it's also got the green cap. And the reason they put a green bulb in a green cap is that if you put an orange bulb in the green cap, you get a different colour. So that's what they did. They're no longer available and they don't stock them. And yeah, that's that. So, but what he has done, very kindly, is sent me the later style. And I wanted to show you this. God, I've taken it apart again. What have I done? Because it is a slightly different design, as you can see. Profile is slightly different, but that's what they use on the current production ones. So he said, this is what we can do for you. It runs off the mains, 240 volts. It's a 220 volt. It's rated for 220 volts. So we're going to need a slight limiting resistor in there. No problem. We can do that. But yeah, that's what's going in place. I mean, it's still a Matamp part, so it's still appropriate for the amplifier. That's what they use. That's what's going in. Petal Dare, sorry if I get that wrong, says, those older Vox vents break very easily. I would encourage you to tap them out slowly and evenly from the inside. There's a through hole. At least that's how it is on mine. Do you know what? As it currently stands at 11:42 AM on Monday the 23rd of December, I haven't looked yet. I haven't stuck my head inside the cabinet to see how they are. So if I can tap them out, that's even better, because it means I haven't got to drill out that broken stud. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But I will film it. I will show you all guys. But thanks for the tip. That's really handy. Joel Kaplan says, you have been a wonderful addition to my YouTube subscriptions. Well, thank you so much for being a subscriber. Thank you for tuning in. And I really hope that you enjoy the content as much as I enjoy making it. A few questions. Okay. I am/have been working on my 1994 Fender The Twin, also known as the evil twin. Is that the one with the red knobs on? I think it is. Just a simple recap job on one burnt out resistor. The resistor was a 10 watt 30k that was reading roughly 26k in the circuit. I swapped it out for a fresh one, but when I removed it, it reads 30k. I thought it was fine to check resistors in a circuit. Maybe I'm missing something. Well, it depends where in the circuit the resistor is, if there's anything else connected to it, and what its function in the circuit is. So sometimes you just have to desolder one leg, lift it, and then you can measure it just to check. If it's reading 26k, it's a 30k 10 watt resistor, so it's probably in the power supply somewhere. I haven't looked at the schematic. If it's reading 26k in circuit, but when you read it, it's 30k, it's fine. Yeah, you don't know what else is around it. There could be something in parallel with it that gives you that slightly off reading. He goes on to say there are no twisted pairs in the chassis, which got me to wondering which wires in a valve amp should be twisted. Well, the general convention used to be that any AC wires carrying AC voltage should be twisted. Often ones from the power or mains transformer, so heaters, high voltage, stuff like that should all be twisted. Some amp circuit designs and layouts in the chassis don't require that. And you'll often see there are some amp builders who build in a certain style, won't twist their valve heaters, for example. They'll just run them in parallel, and they get super quiet amplifiers built that way. But the general convention is that anything that's AC, carrying AC voltage, should be twisted. Not necessarily, and I'm not talking about signal wires here, because obviously signal is AC, but we're talking about high voltage, low voltage, stuff from a transformer, basically. Output transformer wires often twisted too. Last question, is there a standard convention as to which preamp tube does what in the layout of an amp, so I can tell which is V1 to V7, for example, without reading a schematic and tracing it out? Again, it depends on the circuit design and circuit layout. And it's not often obvious which is which. One thing you can do is a rule of thumb which carries across nearly every amp design is that the last preamp valve before the output valves, the phase inverter, is often the one nearest to the output valves. Not always the case, as we've seen on that 18 watt, but often your phase inverter valve is the one that's closest to the output valves. And that's probably true in 95-96% of cases, right? V1, the most sensitive valve in the circuit, assuming V1 is your input valve, should, not always the case, but should, I've got to caveat everything here, be as far away from the mains input as possible and as close to your guitar inputs as possible. So that's generally the convention, generally how things are done. But the manufacturer should say which one is which in the handbook, and go from there. But in Fender style amps, often when viewed from the rear, V1 is furthest on the right, and then you count along that way. Amps like Voxes and like that high watt that was in recently, they have a different layout and configuration, so you do need to look these things up. Keith Kendall, who is a regular commenter, welcome back Keith, says, "Hi Chris, excellent and very interesting as always." Talking about the 18 watt clone here, I told you there were a lot of comments and questions on this. Could it be that the add cap switch is intended to only be used in conjunction with solid state mode and hence bypass the EZ81? No, and I tell you why. Good thought though. is that they didn't mention this in the video, but this amp has already been to 2 previous techs to try and sort these issues out. And one tech added that cap in an attempt to fix the ghost note issues. Clearly it hasn't worked. You're right. I mean, I wouldn't use that switch with the valve rectifier because, as I've stated, it's putting too much strain on the rectifier valve. I would only use it in solid state mode. But as far as I understand, and from the emails that I've seen and the paperwork provided, it was an attempt to help fix the ghost note issue. Can you remember what position the add cap switch was in when you first switched the amp on? Yes, the cap was out of circuit when I first played it. And if it was in valve, yeah, it was in valve rectification mode. I wonder if this has also cooked the EZ81 and therefore the HT voltage is too low and hence the very low output. No, the HT voltage is in fact too high. And the low output is because those output valves were cooked beyond belief. They are dead, so we've got a new set to go in. Basically, this amplifier, and I was going to go into this in the next video on it, the transformer in it is wrong. I think it's a 5E3 style transformer. So the voltages are too high. It's often these have a 580 volt secondary. That's where you kind of want these 18 watters to be. So it's a 290, 0290. It's a center tap winding. This one is much higher. The customer did email me and wants me to quote to replace the transformers on it. Now, you might argue that it's probably not worth it on an amp like that, but to him it is. So I'm going to quote him for a set of transformers for it, a nice high quality set, and that's going to bring everything down. It's going to allow me to run the amp where I want to run it, filter it as I want, set all the voltages through the amp where I want them to be, and optimize it. He's keen for this amp to be the best version of itself, even if it is, a kit build. Just because it was, just because it's a kit doesn't mean it can't be good, right? And we can get these things good, and the customer's happy to spend some money on it. I mean, he's already got a set of Celestian gold, 10-inch golds in it, so doesn't shy away from putting money into it. He wants it to be good. So, and if he's happy with the price, then he'll go ahead with that. Not everything is about resale value, is it? So, yeah. So I think that I'm going to quote him on that, and if he goes ahead with that, that's probably what we'll do, and take it from there. Well, that's it then, guys. I hope that was helpful. I hope I've answered your questions and comments this week. I will catch you all at the next one.